In this video, we will create a slider that you see on the screen right now. We'll be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I will break it down into two parts, so two videos. One will cover the markup, and the other one will focus on the JavaScript logic, and some more advanced CSS related to it. You'll find the project files in the description. You'll have an option to have CSS ready, so you can focus on JS for the next video, or if you want, you can start from scratch, like I'll be doing in this video. Without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so as you can see, we'll be starting from pretty much nothing visually. When it comes to CSS, the only thing that I did is add a custom font, but that's basically it. And then there's also all of these images that are coming from the Cyberpunk's official website. Other than that, we're starting from scratch. So before we continue, let me just quickly introduce you to the project so you know the structure. So as you can see, it's a very default HTML, CSS, and JavaScript structure. We have our Git folder, which you don't really need to use for this, but I mean, you will probably have it as well since you're going to be cloning this from GitHub. Then you have the CSS folder, which has two files. One of them is normalized CSS, and then the other one is styles, which is the one where we're going to write our CSS. Then we have images. So inside of images, we have a bunch of SVGs, which are currently not in use, but we will use it in a project later on. And then 3 slides. So the slides are those pictures that were taken from the official website. And then for JS, we only have an empty JavaScript file, which again will not be empty later on because we're going to write our scripts there. For the HTML, for the structure, we have one div. Well, we have the main tag, we have the div tag that is called CyberSlider, so the class is CyberSlider. And then we have the unordered list that holds all of the slides. And then at the end we have the controls for the slider, which currently don't really have anything. As you can see, I already added the classes for active, which again don't really do much right now because we didn't style anything. So I have the same thing for the slides, and then I have the same thing for the controls. So first of all, let's try to hide the unnecessary slides that are not active right now, and also work on some styling of it, because right now we still have the bullets for the ULs, and then yeah, as you can see, our controls also have bullets and are not hidden. So yeah, let's just clean that up. So I'm gonna go into style.css and start working. And yeah, also I should mention that in styles I also have just a little bit of CSS written down, just so we don't have to start from the absolute beginning, because there's just no point of doing that. Like for example, we don't need to specify the font family, we don't need to say box sizing border box, that's all pretty standard stuff. So I thought that it makes sense to skip that. I think I will start from the slider wrapper, so the UL. I just want to remove the ugly bullets here and just like remove the styling of the unordered list. So first of all, I'm gonna say list style none over here. So that's gonna remove the ugly bullets. Now I just want to make sure that there's no padding added to it and no margin. So padding is gonna be 0 pixels for now. And I'm gonna add some margin as well. So there you go, we removed the margin. It's starting to look better, but still not quite there. Now that we have this, I want to target each of these slides and make sure that they're not showing up one after another. I want them to be in the same spot. So what we'll do is we will actually position them absolute, and each of these slides is going to be on top of each other, and then the active one is going to be on top of everything. That's how it's going to work. So let's just take this class right here for the slide, for the individual slide, and let's specify that this is going to be positioned as absolute. There you go, as you can see, they're on top of each other, which is exactly what we want. And now the current one is going to be on top of everything. So, well, the active one, right? That's the class? Yeah, active. And the way we'll do that is by specifying z index. So I'm just going to say 1999, which puts it at the top. It's still a bit confusing because we see the text on top of it. So let's do that after. Let's do this as the next step. Actually, before we do, let's make sure we position it on top of the screen so that it's not showing up like this with an empty space right here. So I'm just gonna say that the top will be 0 and then the left will be also 0 for the positioning. And that removes the space. So that's good. So now we need to take care of the text somehow. So in this case, we can do multiple things. First of all, we can position the text absolute to be on top of the image, or we can position the image absolute. And because I know what we're gonna do later on with the image, I think it is a better approach to actually position the image as absolute. So that's what I'm gonna do next. I will go into one of these slides just to see what the naming convention is for the class, and I will take the cyber slider img wrap and I will target it and say that it's also positioned absolute. And you know what? I can see that it's pretty much the same code as the cyber slider slide. So I will just apply it to that as well. And now we get something like this. So this is because our image is on top of the text now. So the text is, as you can see, at the top. When I inspect it, it's over there, but you can't really see it because it's hidden. So let's target that next. So let's see, the class name for the content is cyber slider content. So let's go over here and position it first of all relative, which already actually does what we want. So that's it, position relative. Just to quickly show you what we're actually doing with this active class, let's say I switch it back to the second slide. As you can see, now we're showing the second slide. If I remove it and I put it on the third, we get the third. That's the idea of how we're gonna actually manipulate it later on. But for now, we'll keep it at the first because we are kind of far away from that. We need to style it first. Okay, so we are starting to get somewhere with this. I believe the next logical step would be to style the text so that it doesn't show up, first of all, full width and full height like that, and it's positioned in the correct way. So first of all, let's make sure that it doesn't span all the way to the end of the screen. So I'm targeting it right here. I will just take this class right here. And actually, I will not touch the slider content. I will target the slider text this time, because that's what's actually holding the text. And you'll see why later on, because I will actually write extra stuff for the content and not the text. So yes, as I said, first of all, max width should be something like 650 pixels. The background, I already have the color for this. So I will just use it right away. So this is the color. It's a slight variation of the yellow that Cyberpunk uses. I want to have some sort of padding added to this. I will use padding of 30 pixels. And also let me just shrink it down to something like this, because we're actually doing mobile first. So it makes sense to start from that. I want to add margin to this so that on mobile there is actually extra space on the top and at the bottom and to the right of this text. So it's going to be shown up like this. So the margin is going to be like this. 30 pixels. So that's to the top. So 30 pixels at the top, 15 pixels on the right, 60 pixels at the bottom, and then 15 pixels on the left. So yeah, this is how it's going to look like for super small devices. So for something like iPhone 5, I want it to be like this. Now you might notice that the image does not look how we want it to look like. We want it to span all the way and not look like this. So let's take care of that. Okay, so to make sure that the image goes all the way down, we need to set some sort of a height to the slider, and then we will just specify that this image should cover 100% of the space. So first of all, let's make sure we set that up for the slider. So I will target it like this. So cyber slider, I'm just gonna do it all the way at the top, because that's, when it comes to hierarchy, that's the first thing that we see in the HTML. So over here, this is the first thing, and then we'll go down. So yeah, I'm gonna place it here. And I will specify that the min height is going to be something like 500 pixels, which gives us something like this, as you can see. Okay, so we have this minimum height of 500 pixels. Now let's target the image itself inside of the IMG wrap. So this thing right here, and add the height of 100% to it, like this. You might notice that this doesn't exactly look like 500 pixels, right? This height right here, it's something weird. So actually what you're looking at right now is the height of the image itself, which is 800 pixels. So we want to remove that so that it doesn't actually affect the size of this. So what we could do is we could set it as a background image, but I actually want to use this image later on and target it with JavaScript, so that's why I'm keeping it like this. So what we need to do in this case is, first of all, we need to position it as absolute, like I mentioned earlier. That gives us something like this. So that's kind of weird, right? The image went away. And that's because right now it doesn't know what width and height it needs to have. So we'll target that in a second. So let's actually do that. So width is also going to be 100%, which gives us something like this still. And that's because the wrap is also without the width. So let's make sure. So basically this image is going to look at the wrapper right here. So the image looks here, and then this wrap needs to look at the overall height of the slide. So the way we're going to achieve that is like this, width 100% and height also 100%. And there you go, we have our width. So as I said, the wrap right now is looking at the width of and height of the cyber slider right here. So it's basically trying to find anything in the hierarchy of HTML that has width and height attributes. It goes all the way to this div, it finds it, and that's what we get. So you might notice that it's not exactly what we're looking for with the image. So first of all, it's not spanning all the way to browser's width when we scale up. And then also it kind of shrinks right here. It's hard to see because of this text, but if I would specify that the opacity is 0, you will see that it's distorting the image when we resize. So we don't want that. So to fix that, what we'll do is again go back to the IMG, so the actual image itself, so slider, cyber slider, IMG wrap, IMG, and we will put something like this, object fit cover. So if you're not familiar what this is, it's very similar to background size cover. So when you set the image as a background of the element, you have an option to set it as a cover. So when you resize, it will now try to adjust to what you have. So it doesn't actually distort the image, now it's staying as is. Now we want to make sure that the image actually goes all the way to the end of the screen at all times. So let's target that. And the way we'll do this is we will target the slide now, so the actual li element that holds the slide, or each of the slides, and we'll specify that the width is 100% as well. Again, this 100% means that it tries to look at any element that holds it that has a specified width. In this case, it finds the div and it assumes that this is what we're trying to get. So we want this image to actually be bigger than it is. How do we do that? Well, let's go back to the CSS. And first of all, let's make sure that the cyber slider div actually has position relative. This will make sure that all of the elements with position absolute will look at this element with position relative. That's how it works. So you have position absolute element, let's say you specify height on it, it will check the closest parent with position relative and it will apply the height of that. So the way it works, the reason why we do position relative here is because if we specify, let's say, a height with percentage on one of the parents of this element, that element will try to find something with position relative and look at its height. So that's how we connect all of this. You might notice that now something also jumped to this part right here. We have this little gap, and let's take a look at why that is. So that's because our slide has a top position of 0, which in this case looks like this. So why does it look like that? We have this UL for controls, and this UL right now has its own padding, because we didn't remove the default, it has its own margin, the one that we didn't remove that comes with HTML by default. Yeah, so it does that little offset, and that's why everything jumps a little bit. So maybe let's just get rid of that right away. Let's take the Cyber slider controls, go somewhere at the bottom right here, right before our media queries, and let's just specify that this is going to be positioned absolute as well. We're going to style it later on, but for now position absolute just removes it from the DOM, and now we see it there. Okay, so now let's go back to our image. And what do we need to do here? So we actually need to specify the height on the slide as well. So the actual div, the li element that holds our image and everything else. And if we do that, that should fix the issue with this height. So let me just find it, it's right here. And I will specify height of 100%. And let's make sure that it works properly. Yes, so it goes all the way to 500 pixels, and then it stops right here, which is exactly what we want. Okay, let's do a little bit more work on the text right here. So I know that I've added this padding right here to kind of center this text on smaller devices. So for example, on something like iPhone 6 or iPhone 5, I do want that spacing to be here, so that the text is kind of positioned, well, not the text, the box itself is positioned in the middle, and then we would have controls below. But on everything that is bigger than that, so let's say Pixel 2 XL and bigger screens like that, I actually want to have this text connected to the side, so there shouldn't be any padding here. So let's do that. So I will copy this slide text div and place it somewhere in here. So it's going to be starting from anything that has a width of 400 pixels and higher. I will remove the unwanted stuff, so I actually just want to control the padding and the margin. Everything else can stay the same. So first of all, for the padding, let's add 50 pixels at the top and the bottom, so that we have a little bit more spacing around it. On smaller sizes I don't want it, because we want to make sure we don't use too much space, because the devices are smaller, but on anything bigger it's fine. And then for the margin, we pretty much have the same thing. For now, let's just get rid of the padding on the left. We have 4 values, and it works clockwise, so this is top, this is right, this is bottom, this is left. So we'll just make it 0 for now. So we get something like this. Let's continue styling the text box, and now let's focus on that uneven shaped bottom part of the element. So if you saw the preview of the video, you saw what I had here. So let me just bring up Figma real quick, and this is the element that I'm talking about. So yeah, I just quickly went in and I just did one element, then I copied it over and put it at the top. The reason why there's 2 of them is because when we go to JavaScript, we'll have something like this. So let me just do it like this. Let me do 2 white backgrounds to imitate that there is like a boundary or something. And the way it's gonna work is it will quickly switch between 1 and 2, like this. So something like that, which will imitate the glitchy effect. So for now, we don't need to worry about it. We just need to make sure that we have this element showing up, at least one of them. So I already have this as an SVG in our project, so we don't need to export it, anything like that. We just need to include it. So it's called bottom separator. The way we will apply it is by targeting the text div. So let me just find it. Yeah, right here. Cyber slider slide text. We will apply it as an after element. So it's a pseudo element that will hold that extra effect. So the way we'll do it is we'll specify the content. In this case, it's empty, there's nothing. We'll make sure that it's displayed as block, positioned as absolute. The bottom will be something like minus 30 pixels. I might adjust this. Left is going to be 0. And I know right now it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing because it's not showing up. So for now, let's just do a background red and specify the width 100%. And the height will be something like 30 pixels. Okay, so you see that we have this element. So right now you see that it's actually going further than I want to. So if we make the browser bigger, the width 100% in this case is pointing to something else. So as I said, when you specify something like 100%, it basically looks at something with position relative or like some parent of this element that has some kind of width. And then it specifies that, okay, this is 100%. If you say, let's say 80%, it would be 80% of whatever that width is. In this case, it's pointing to our div, so everything that holds our slider and everything. And in this case, it's the width of the browser, which we don't want. We want it to be connected specifically to the text, because it has a maximum width of, I think, 650 or something like that. So in order for us to get that, we just need to specify the position relative on this element. So the after pseudo element lives inside of this div, or I think this is an li or something, I don't remember. But yeah, we just specify position relative and that fixes the issue. So there you go. Our element is almost ready. All we have to do is specify the image and then of course style it correctly. So as I said, I have already created the separator for us, so the one that I showed in Figma previously. So all we have to do here is just point to this image. So it's called bottom separator. Well, it's an SVG element. So I will specify the URL, and since my CSS is located in a folder, I will first of all go out of that folder. Then I will specify that I want to go into image, and I want the bottom separator SVG. And there you go, I already have the element. Now let's just make sure that it's positioned exactly how I want. So I will say background position, and it's going to be 0 and 0. Let me just inspect it, make sure that it's exactly how I want. And yeah, I think this is it. Next up, let's add one more after element. This time let's do it on the text right here. So between the title and then the description, we'll have that extra element. So I will just quickly inspect to see what the class for this title is. And it's called heading LG. You might notice that I already wrote just a bit of styling for it, just so we start from something. And in this case, we're gonna also create a pseudo element. So heading LG after, same thing, the content is empty, display is block. The height in this case is going to be something like 10 pixels. Again, let's just add background so we see what we're doing. For now it's going to be background red, so we're already creating that after element. And then for the margin top, I will specify 0.5 EM. So you might notice I used font size of 2 REM here for the heading LG. So REMs are pointing to the font size of the HTML element. So the default font size is 16 pixels. So 2 REM basically means 32 pixels. And then 0.5 EM, EMs are pointing to the parent element, so the font size of the parent element. In this case, it's heading LG. So 0.5 EM is pointing to the font size of the parent element. In this case, it's heading LG, which means that, say I would want to change this to 3 REM, the spacing between these elements will also adjust, so it's dynamic. So yeah, I will specify it as 0.5 EM and keep it at that. The width is going to be 100%, although I believe it is already. And yeah, this is it. Now let's actually add the image. So this one is going to be called, well, it's already called text separator.svg. So let's add it here. Instead of background red, let's change it to the URL. Same thing as before. We're getting out of the CSS folder, and then we're going to img text separator.svg. And you see something weird is happening. That's because it's repeating itself, because it's not big enough for this width. So we need to specify background repeat, no repeat, like this. And just to make sure that it's positioned in the right way, let's specify background position. So there you go, now we have this. Okay, so we are getting somewhere. This is already looking more like what I showed in the preview. Let's make sure our text box, so all of this, is centered vertically. The way we're gonna do this is by specifying display flex on something and then aligning it to the center. So let's take this cyber slide, which is the parent of the image and the content. Let's find it in our CSS. So we actually don't have a separated section for it. So let's create it and specify that this is display flex, and the align items will be centered. Something like this. And yeah, as you can see, we're almost there with the CSS. There are a couple of things I want to target. So first of all, I want to make the bullets and also style this image just a bit so it's not as bright. So I will add a pseudo element that covers it a bit. Okay, so remember what we did with the controls? We just specified position absolute on it just to kind of put it out of the way. Now let's actually style it. So yeah, to kind of give us an idea of how it looks like, I will just, as usual, add the background color of red. And yeah, as you can see, it's hidden behind all of the elements. So because this is our controls, we need to make sure that it's always visible on the screen. So the Z index is going to be 1999. So there you go. There is our box. Again, it's not styled at all. We need to make sure we get rid of the padding and things like that. So yeah, let's do that. So padding 0 pixels, margin 0. That kind of removes it for us just because there's literally nothing in that element right now. But don't worry, we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, we kind of cleared it out. There's no point of doing anything to this element just yet. Let's focus on the elements inside of this wrapper. So the cyber slider controls has all of our what's going to be bullets in near future. So let's focus on those. So cyber slider controls. I don't think we really need to target the li much. So yeah, let's just focus on the A element right here. So the link that holds that screen readers only text. So we're gonna do it like this. So cyber slider controls A. We target it, and each of these bullets is going to have a certain width and height, and it's going to have a before element inside of it, which will look like our bullet. So yeah, for our bullets, what do we need to do here? So first of all, we have 3 bullets. So if you remember, the preview is just a rectangle, and then when you click on it, it also has an active effect. Well, in this case, I called the class of current, which has those extra, I guess, ornaments, if that's the right word to call it. But yeah, there is some style that is connected to that current class. So we need to style that as well. But let's begin with bullets just on its own. Just any bullet will have a width of 30 pixels and also the height of 30 pixels. And you know what? Instead of having a background red on the controls, let's just add it to the bullets. So yeah, we specify the background red, but nothing happens. Well, that's because the A element is displayed as inline, which means it doesn't actually have its own height. Basically, it depends on the text that is inside of it. So if I remove the class of SR only, as you can see, the height of the element is now the height of the text. But because we have that SR only class, it basically hides the element from the DOM, so it thinks that it's empty. So we need to make sure that it doesn't think that, and we need to make sure that this height right here applies. The way to do it is very simple. We just specify display block, and there you go. So yeah, that's a bit confusing because they're really close to each other. Let's make sure each of these elements has a margin of 15 pixels. So that should help it stand out a bit more. And now that we have this, so the actual bullets should be slightly smaller than they are right now. So the actual link will be 30 pixels by 30 pixels, but the bullet inside of it only needs to be 15 pixels. That's how I want it to be. Just because those extra borders that we're gonna add for the active element are gonna be located right here. The way we're gonna do this is by using pseudo elements, just like before. So this is gonna be, well, before. Cyber slider controls a before. And for now, I'm just gonna say content, which is nothing. Display block, as usual, with 15 pixels, height 15 pixels as well. And let's just get rid of this background here and apply it to the before element. So there you go. So what we did is we created that extra element inside of the link, which looks like this. Now, if you inspect each of these links, you'll see that the box is still 30 by 30, but the bullet is located in the top left corner, which is basically a default position for the element. Let's make sure we don't have that, and on the controls, let's center it by specifying display flex inside of display block and aligning it in the center and justifying also center. So it's kind of hard to see the difference, but here's what I'll do to show it to you. So first of all, let's change this background to the yellow color, and then right here let's change it to red, just for the preview. So this is basically what we're getting. So the actual link is slightly bigger than the bullet, just so that it's first of all it's easier to click on it, so the person doesn't need to try to match the cursor inside of this small element. There's a little bit of a buffer, and also we will use that extra space for the current element, because it's gonna have the borders here. So actually, let's do that next. The way that's gonna work is very simple. So we know that the current element of the current slide that is active will have a class of current applied to it. So let's target that. So I'm just gonna press Alt Shift and then down to copy this selector right here. I will bring it down, then I will press Alt Shift F just to prettify everything, just so it goes here, so it looks clean. And yes, I will add this current element. So the structure is like this: we have slider controls, then we have the current, and then we have the link. So that's why I'm targeting the controls first, then the current element, and then the link inside of it. And yeah, so now all we have to do is just add that background image. So again, this is something that comes with the project files. You don't have to make it, and the name of it is going to be accent active bullet.svg. So we'll add it as a background image of this current link. So background image, or just background, up to you how you want to call it. And yes, same thing as before. We point to the image, to the images folder, sorry, and we select the accent active bullet.svg. So as you can see, something weird is happening. That's just because it's trying to repeat this element. We don't want that, but we actually don't have to change the background repeat, because we're just gonna specify that this element needs to be covering the available space. So background size will be cover. And there you go. So that's good. Now that we have that, let's make sure we position them in the right place. So on mobile, these bullets are gonna live right under everything else here. To do that, let's take this Cyber Slider Controls div and add some extra CSS to it. So it's already positioned absolute, which is pointing to the slide, the whole slider. So the top element, so the positioning of top 0 is right here, bottom 0 is right here. So let's specify that the bottom is 0, so it goes all the way down, which works well, but not exactly what we want still. We need to make sure that the bullets are not right under another, but are aligned next to each other, which we can do with Flexbox. So display flex, which does this. And then let's also position the bullets in the middle. So for that, we'll have to specify that the left is 0, right is 0. And if you look at the inspect element, if you hover over the the controls, you'll see that it now takes full width, because we specified that the left is 0 and then the right is also 0. So left is right here, 0, and then the right 0 is right here. And now all we have to do to center it, to center our bullets, is to specify justify content center. And there you go. One more thing I want to do here, I don't want the bullets to be all the way at the bottom of the slider. I want to have an extra space here. So instead of bottom 0, I'll say bottom 20 pixels, which will bring it a little bit to the top. If I make it even smaller, we get something like this. So we're almost done with our mobile size. Now let's just make sure that the image is not in our face, so it's not distracting us from the bullets, for example. We need to add some sort of a separation here. So what I have in mind is another before element, which will darken the image. So that before element will live on each slide, and it's gonna, as I said, separate the content from the image. So let's target the cyber slide right here, and let's add an after element. Same thing as before, so content nothing, display it as block. Let's add the background red right away so we see what we're doing. For now it shouldn't appear at all, yep, and it doesn't. Width is going to be 100%, height is also 100%. And of course position is absolute. So we get something like this. Good thing that we did this. We actually forgot to remove these bullets right here and the margins on the controls. So before we continue with the rest, let's just go back to controls and quickly fix that up. So list style is going to be none, which removes these bullets. And I think, yeah, margin and padding are removed. I think the rest should be fine. All right, back to our before element, or sorry, after element. So we need to make sure that this element doesn't cover our text, obviously. So what we'll do is, first of all, let's make sure it's not this ugly red color. Let's just use black. For what we're doing, it's perfectly fine. And then we don't want it to be fully black. We just want the opacity to be, let's say, 0.5 for now. So we get something like this. As you can see, the bullets are already at the top. That's because the Z index of the bullets is 999, which is higher than the Z index of this before, or sorry, this after element. And now let's just make sure that the rest of the content is on top, specifically this text. So actually all we have to do is right here for this slider content, specify Z index of, let's say, 1. Now it's gonna bring it up over here. And so I believe that's it for the mobile. Let's move on to bigger sizes. And actually there's not much to be done here. I think we're only missing the bullets. So when you go to the bigger size, and actually, sorry, bullets, and I want the height to be different. So for that we'll go to the media queries. I will take the cyber slider div right here. And maybe let's say starting from 1992 pixels and higher, the mean height will be something like 750. So 750 pixels. And we get something like this. And then one more thing I want to do, I want to move these bullets over here, so to the right, and I want to position them instead of horizontally, vertically, like they were originally. So for that, I just need to target the controls. So this right here. So as you remember, we specified that it's displayed as flex. So we could reverse the way they're showing up by specifying the flex direction column, which will change the way they're laying out from being horizontal to vertical. So let's add it right here. So flex direction is column, which gives us this. And all we have to do now is just control the positioning of these things. So the right is going to be 0, as before. Left is going to be unset. which means that it's whatever it was originally, which is nothing. It was not set. That's why it's called unset. The bottom is also going to be unset. So we're just clearing out what we did originally. So bottom is also unset. And now let's focus on how we're gonna make sure that it's centered. And you know what? For now, let's keep it as is. I'm noticing that the spacing between these bullets is kind of too much. So on mobile, when we had it over here, it actually made more sense because on mobile devices the screen is smaller, so when you use your finger to tap on it, you can accidentally click on the other elements. So it actually makes sense that they're separated so much. But on desktop it's kind of looking weird, so I want to change that. So I will just take this margin, so on the controls, on the link itself, so slider controls A, I want to make sure that the margin is not 15 pixels, but maybe something like 10 pixels. I think 10 is enough. Yeah, something like that. So just slightly smaller than before. Okay, now let's go back to the top. So, I mean the positioning of the top of this element. So if you remember, we have the flex box on it, so display flex, justify content center. In here we're specifying that the flex direction is column, which means that this justify content center, instead of working horizontally like it did before, it's now centering vertically. Which means that depending on the height of this element, this is going to be vertically aligned. How do we vertically align it though? How do we make sure that the height is not this, but it actually goes all the way? Well, that's pretty simple. Since this element is looking at the height of our parent, which is basically the slider itself, all we have to do is make sure that the height on this element is 100%. And there you go. So that solves the issue. Now it's perfectly centered, and if you start resizing, at some point you'll see that this element jumps to the bottom. And so that's it. So the actual CSS part is done. Congratulations, you got to the end of it. Now we're gonna start doing something that is more advanced. We will start writing JavaScript and also writing some advanced CSS.